I just love mentoring, the guys. Hospitality, to them, it's more of a job. It's not a career. And it's just instilling in them what I've learned, you know what I mean? Trying to be better every day. And the main thing is to be consistent. That's very difficult here when there's not so much of a culture of really good hospitality.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. It's one thing to travel the globe as a professional and immerse yourself in the kitchens of some of the best restaurants, but it's another to immerse yourself in a completely different culture, way of life, and build a new life plying your trade. What does it take to use your skills and adapt to a completely different environment? Stephen Moore is the co-owner and head chef of Shelter Group in Bali. Stephen, how are you?
Hey mate, how are you? Good to speak to you. Thanks for having me on the show.
It's great to get you on the show. It's been many years since we saw you in Sydney. Tell us a little bit about Bali. What's things like there at the moment?
Oh, it's actually pumping. It's sort of coming back nearly full strength. Everything's opened up. They've just relaxed the entry with the vaccinations, so that's all sorted. So I think we'll get a big influx again. And we're just moving into high season now. So the next 3 or 4 weeks will be, it's already pumping, but it's going to be looking good. But everywhere's going really good.
Bali's been a destination for Australian travellers for a long time now, but as a chef and from a food perspective, does it surprise you sort of what's on offer there in Bali?
I first got here in 2013 after my long stint in Australia, and to be honest, there was pretty much 2 or 3 beach clubs, a couple of the legacy restaurants, as you'd say, and then in the last 10 years, it's just gone absolutely ballistic. It's incredible. Like, you can come here on holiday and you'll have probably a good fortnight of top-notch, world-class restaurants to choose from. And even the beverage programs and the wine programs, natural wines being introduced now, and, there's some really cool wine bars happening. So, yeah, completely changed in the course of 10 years.
Tell us a little bit about, from a produce perspective, have you been sort of open to a whole new array of produce, and has it changed the way you sort of cook?
Oh, without doubt. When I first got to Bali, it was, scrimping and scraping to find, a menu to put together with product. But nowadays, there's producers producing incredible tomatoes, even to say that people have come from Australia and said, well, these are better than Australia, you know what I mean? So, which is pretty impressive. There's George doing the heritage pigs, a real emphasis now on local product. When I first got to Bali, when I was working at Coup d'etat, pretty much all of the menu was like imported, high-end product. But now I can, happily say that it's come full circle, and pretty much everything apart from the steak, the beef, and the sorry, I mucked that up. Everything other than the steak and the lamb are all local.
Tell us a little bit about Shelter Group.
Okay, so end of the pandemic, I was sort of out of work, and just purely by luck, I was asked to be a private chef for one of my buddies. And my now business partners happened to be the guests at one of the dinner parties at the villa. So it was pretty crazy how it all happened. The original shelter started in around 2016, 2017, and it's a cafe in Seminyak. And pretty much that was like an institution over the end of... And then basically we started to look towards opening another restaurant, so Shelter Restaurant.
Tell us about how your role at Shelter began and the creation of Shelter, the restaurant.
So yeah, I was cooking privately for a friend of mine, and my 2 business partners came to one of the dinners, and they basically asked, could I help with the opening of the Shelter. The original Shelter was in Seminyak, a cafe, and that was been going since 2016. That actually shut during the pandemic, and they found another site in Perennian, and that meant that they needed a chef to come on board and basically open it up. So they got me on board, and the rest is history, basically.
What sort of food are you cooking there?
So when I was cooking privately, the guy that I was cooking for was Lebanese, and I happened to have fond memories of cooking with a buddy of mine at Rockpool, Simon Zalua, and he was always showing me some Middle Eastern techniques. And through the private chefing with my mate, he was showing me a lot of old grandmother recipes, and he wanted me to cook Lebanese food, so that's how I got into it.
Tell us about some of those old grandmother recipes. What's one or two that really stand out that you love?
So obviously the chickpea puree, the hummus, the za'atar recipes, all the old breads, so lots of different sage breads, flat breads, the kufta, the spices. Yeah, it's really, really, really interesting food. And I sort of fell in love with it. I've never been to the Middle East. I've never travelled to the Middle East, so it was quite fun just getting to know the recipes and then putting that into a restaurant situation, which was really fun.
Well, I want to explore what you're doing there at Shelter a bit more in a little while, but take us back to when you were young. Where did you grow up, and what sort of role did food play for you?
So I'm from England, from Essex, and I was very lucky as a kid. Food was a massive part of the family life. You know, my mum and dad always instilled. We sat down around the dinner table every night, had a proper meal, sat together as a family, discussed the day's events. You know, when I was at school, my mum would always be cooking, you know, making the old English pies and casseroles, and so food was an integral part of my growing up. Even my father, he wasn't a cook, but as a kid, I watched him. He learnt classic Cantonese cookery, which is bizarre, from a very good friend who was from Hong Kong. So every month he'd invite. My mum and dad have massive families, so every month they'd invite family members for this big Chinese banquet. So he'd spend 3 or 4 days preparing this banquet, which was insane. So forget about the everyday meals that we'd have. He'd spend 3 or 4 days cooking these incredible banquets, which was insane.
Was there a Cantonese dish that you remember fondly from those days?
The spare ribs. But he'd go to the local, back in the late 80s, early 90s, Asian food in Colchester where I lived was, it was the Chinese takeaway, and that was it, or the Indian. So there was one Chinese grocery store that we'd go, and I will never forget walking into the grocery store and having that incredible smell of the 5 spice and, the different ingredients. I'll never forget that.
When did you sort of start to think about chefing as a career?
So, I was at primary school, and I remember I must have been 6 years old, and the teacher said, right, today we're doing a cooking lesson, and we're going to make currant buns, cupcakes. And for some reason, that lesson, I just loved it and enjoyed it. And then more and more I got introduced to cooking with my mum on the weekend or in the evenings after school. And then for some reason, from a very young age, I wanted to be a chef. Wow.
Well, what was your first steps into the industry and in a role in a commercial kitchen?
So all through school, I sort of knew what I wanted to do. I took home economics as a subject. Ironically, failed it at GCSE. I was more of a practical person. All through school, I sort of knew that I wanted to be a chef, and it was at that point, it was whether I would I looked at my mum and dad would take me to careers meetings at school, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And it was just purely the fact of which avenue I would take to be a chef, whether it would be in the armed forces, in the army, or doing an apprenticeship, or then doing college. city and guilds, because in Colchester, where I live, there was a very good technical college called Colchester Institute, and they ran a 3-year city and guilds program. So I took it upon myself to go to college full time. So as I meant to enroll to the college, the local 5-star hotel, the Mill Hotel, it was the summer, and I was on my bike, and I thought, why don't I just go and see if I can get some work experience before I start college? And I picked up a job as a kitchen hand, washing up. So, yeah.
You spent time in France and Switzerland, and also in the UK and London as well. What were the really sort of integral sort of venues and people that you worked with at the beginning of your career?
So I finished my technical college, 3 years. Part of that was to get overseas experience, to complete the certificate. And they shipped me off to the south of France, to Périgord, as an 18-year-old in a caravan at the back of the restaurant, you know, going to the markets every morning, 6 a.m. And then just cooking the most incredible, you know, this is the food that you've been, you know, classically French trained through college. And it's there in front of you, foie gras every day for breakfast, truffles, you know, going to see how, you know, they're shooting the pigeons, farmers on the back door of the restaurant selling buckets of mushrooms. It was just incredible. So from there, I got back to England after 6 months in the south of France and then 2 years in Switzerland. And then just purely by luck, I went to see my old lecturer to say hello at the college and say thank you for the hookups. And then he said, look, we have some exciting news. Mark Prescott, the ex-chef of the Gavroche in Mayfair in London, has just purchased the oldest pub in England, which happened to be the White Hart down the road from where I was living. And he was going into business with Michel Roux Senior, and they're looking for a sous chef. Would you be interested? So I thought, yes, definitely. So they hooked me up an interview. There's Mark Prescott, you know, one of the most prestigious chefs in the world, standing there. I need some help to open this pub. Would you be interested? He goes, you work with me for a year, you can work anywhere you want in the world. And that just sort of stuck with me. And least to say, it was the hardest year of my life working, you know what I mean? A crazy experience, you know, 18 hours a day. And just, you know, there was Marco on the end of the phone, like old school kitchen mentality, tough, very, very tough. But that year I spent with him was the ticket to the rest of my life with the reference that he gave me. So, an amazing time.
What sort of impacts did that experience have on sort of your approach to your craft?
I think now, you know, the dedication, the grit, the will, the drive. You know, back then there was no Instagram, there was no application for you to get or require or get information. You know, then you had to, if you wanted to know a recipe or you wanted to see a dish, you'd either have to eat in the restaurant or you'd have to go and work there. You know, recipes, Bibles of recipes I collected over the years. Now I have everything on my phone. It's completely changed.
You mentioned that working with Mark Prescott opened sort of the whole world to you. Where did you go from there?
To be totally honest, after the year with Mark, I was pretty much burnt out. It was a pretty intense time. And I happened to be reading the Hotel and Caterer magazine. And there was an article about a guy called Stephen Thompson, the chef of the region in Auckland. And I thought, why not go to New Zealand? Crazy, just to get away from it. I was sort of overcooking, I was burnt out. And it was pretty much, right, let's get on the plane and see what happens. I sort of needed a break from everything. And I called him and he said, look, I don't have any, he saw my resume and he said, I don't have any places yet, but I can put you in contact with a an agency and they can maybe help you out. And then 3 weeks later, I was in Rotorua in New Zealand.
Wow. How different was that compared to what you were used to in the UK?
Oh, different ends of the scale. Like the executive chef, he was Dutch, so he still had that hardcore old school kitchen mentality, you know what I mean? So it was good to be, but the level of food and the lifestyle, it was more the lifestyle. I took time out for a year, still working and progressing in my career, you know, doing cooking competitions and stuff like that, but it was purely a sort of a detox from cooking, and then just to find my feet again. So then the restaurant manager of the hotel, she had good connections in Australia. So I thought, right, I'm in New Zealand. Why don't I? I've always dreamed of going to Australia. And then luckily enough, the same process, I got in touch with a job agency in Sydney, and they placed me, which I'm very, very grateful now. I spent a long time with Hyatt Hotels, starting in Canberra. And that's where I sort of met my first real mentor in cooking.
Wow. Well, tell us about who that was and what impacts they had on you.
So I moved to Canberra in, I think it was 97 or 98. And there was a gentleman, or my good buddy now, Tony Carroll. He was the ex-chef of the Glen Eagles in Scotland. And the Park Hyatt in Canberra had a fine dining restaurant called the Oak Room. And again, saw my resume, saw that where I'd worked, and picked me up. And I was in Canberra 2 weeks later, you know what I mean? Starting working at the Park Hyatt. So, and then again, it's all about being in the right place at the right time. I did a year with him, and he was good friends with Paul Wilson. They'd worked together in Piccadilly in London, and they were opening the new Radii restaurant at the Park Hyatt in Melbourne for the year 2000. So after a year at Canberra, they transferred me up to Poole, and that's where things really changed for me in regards to product and cooking, because I'd come from a very classical background where it was, 20 garnishes on the plate, and that changed completely with working with Paul, which I'm forever grateful for as well.
Was that transformational period difficult for you, or did it have its challenges? Tell us about that time.
So pretty much I went from super high-end fine dining. I got to work with Paul, and he just completely turned everything upside down. It was purely product on the plate, and that was it. A beautiful wood-roasted snapper, burnt lemon, that's it. And I couldn't get my head around it. I was like, what's this? What's going on? You know what I mean? And it was just an incredible year of my life where we'd run the a la carte menu, and then we'd run 4 or 5 specials every day. And it was just, by the year out, I had an encyclopedia of incredible dishes, recipes, and I'd never seen so much Australian produce in my life, It completely changed my whole view on cooking.
You spent quite a lot of time in Sydney as well. Tell us about the move to Sydney and what you did.
So how that came about, I was working with Paul, and we happened to do a chef's dinner with the one and only Mr. Neil Perry and Ross Lustard. So Ross came up with his sous chef, Daryl, and they came and did the dinner. And after the dinner, I sort of got super interested in the way that they were cooking their food and doing their dishes. And I said, the Olympics was coming up. And I said, was there any opportunity that I could get transferred up through Hyatt for a job for the Olympics at the Park Hyatt Sydney? And then they agreed. So I was extremely lucky, moved up to Sydney for the Olympics, and started my journey into Sydney, where that lasted, 12 or 13 years.
Well, you worked with Rockpool and spent time with Bridge Room with Ross Lustard as well. What sort of impact did those restaurants and Ross and Neil have on you?
Incredible. Like, I started at the Park Hyatt for the Olympics with Ross. He happened to move on. As I started, he moved on to work for Aman in Singapore. Singapore. And basically completely changed my whole view again on seasoning, using citrus as a seasoning, different aromats, and again, learning about Asian product. When I was lucky enough to get the job at Rockpool, a young guy from Colchester, Essex, England, and then there I am looking into the Rockpool pantry or the larder, and there's red dates and Shoshing wine and master stock, and it was just completely inspiring. You know what I mean? It's amazing.
You spent a bit of time in the kitchen of the Bridge Room with Ross, which won so many accolades in its time and really sort of took Sydney by surprise. It was a tiny little kitchen. Do you have any stories of what it was like being part of that group then?
It was incredible. I sort of had a very fond relationship with Ross. He sort of took me under his wing at a long time before that. When I was working at the Hyatt, we stayed in contact and we sort of built this amazing relationship. And he was sort of like my mentor, my second mentor. And he'd always said to me, we worked all around the world together with Arman, and he'd always said, I'm going to open the Bridge Room, or we weren't to know that it was going to be called the Bridge Room, but he always wanted to open a restaurant in Sydney. And I was working for Arman, and he basically turned around and said, look, there's a job. I've found the site, which was the Bridge Room in Bridge Street. I want you to come and be my head chef. So that was a pretty crazy experience, The times of, Rabada grills, he was the first sort of pioneer of putting that sort of apparatus into a kitchen. We opened, and with Ross, it was very, very spontaneous. Like I've never worked with anyone like it in my life. Incredible deft touch with, he'd plate a dish and you'd be like, how does the rest of the brigade plate that dish? You know what I mean? Like incredible deft touch with product aesthetically. His, the way he seasoned things, and it was all in his mind. You know what I mean? It was sometimes quite frustrating to work with him because it would be there and I'm like waiting as the head chef, you know what I mean? I have to relay how everything works with that dish to the other members of the team, and it's there, and then bang, it would happen, and we got 10 minutes before service, you know what I mean? But it kept it very, very interesting, I must say.
We've had Ross on the show, and he talked about the tiny kitchen there and dealing with no sort of large cool room and deliveries. Well, what was it like for you as head chef trying to operate that kitchen?
Pretty much it was, we would order enough for lunch. 2:00 we'd get another seafood delivery. And then it was pretty much prepping for that service. You could never be, obviously an amazing experience, but you would never be more than a service in prep ready. So it was pretty full on. And then the restaurant, we got 2 hats straight off the bat. We'd been open, I think 2 or 3 months, and then the Good Food guy come out, who was up for best new restaurant. We got 2 hats. And then because of the Rabada style cooking, every chef and his dog were in the restaurants coming into the kitchen, seeing this new style of cooking. So it was a very, very interesting time. But it was challenging, but an amazing challenge to have. It's much to say that at Shelter, we didn't have a cool room. We'd been open a year and a half. We didn't have a cool room until 6 months ago, and we were doing 200, 250. So that really shaped the way that I was working, you know what I mean? So it was a very, very good experience.
You mentioned that Ross Lustard's one of your mentors. What impact has he had on you and your cooking?
It's bizarre. Like, it's hard to put one point on it, but even day in, day out, you're with someone or you're with a team, 16, 17 hours a day. It was, now I feel, it sounds a bit weird, but you get the same mannerisms as your mentors. Do you know what I mean? Like, I react the same way to situations the same way he would. You know what I mean? It's bizarre how you become so tight with someone and you work so hard together. Yeah, it's bizarre.
You spent some of your career traversing the globe as well, New Delhi and Barcelona. Tell us a bit about some of the sort of real amazing experiences you've had cooking.
Yeah, that was again down to Ross. So I was finished rock pool. When was that? 2005. There was an opportunity at Icebergs. I took that for a couple of years, which was amazing. Again, working with Morris really showed me the deal of hospitality and how you should treat a guest, you know what I mean? While I was at Icebergs, you know, sitting there one sunny day doing the ordering, and I get a phone call from Mr. Lustard saying, there's a job you might want to take. And I was like, what do you mean? I'm super happy at Icebergs, living in Bondi. And he goes, how would you like to go and work in India? And I'm like, you got to be joking me. And sort of declined straight away. He goes, let me explain the job. So they were opening the first city hotel for Aman Resorts in New Delhi. They had 2 projects in Rajasthan already open, but they needed a city base so it was easier transiting for the guests. And Adrian Zecker, the chairman of Aman Resorts, had eaten at Can Fabas in Barcelona, just close to Barcelona, from 3-star Michelin Santi Santa Maria. And he was going to consult for the restaurant. So what they wanted was a head chef to go and open a Spanish restaurant in New Delhi, which sounds absolutely nuts. So a month later, I'm on a plane with Ross to Barcelona to meet Santi, and then spent 6 months in Barcelona at a 3-star, learning everything from Santi one-on-one, which was an absolutely incredible experience. From there, I then moved to New Delhi and spent 2 years on and off in New Delhi trying to open the restaurant. And through that, because of the delays of the hotel, I got shipped off to Sri Lanka, Montenegro, hooked up with Ross again in Montenegro to sort out Sveti Stefan, which was a private island. And then from there, stayed in India, which was incredible, and then moved back to Sydney in 2009.
What did you love about your time in New Delhi?
I think it was just so outrageous. Like, you couldn't comprehend it. Like, to turn around to someone today and explain how India is as a country and as a culture, it's impossible. You have to go there to experience it for yourself. Like, the food is just incredible. I'd never eaten Indian food. You know, coming from England, everyone eats a curry, but I'd never experienced Indian food. Just as a kid, never been approached to go and eat it. So I was very lucky. I went and ate Indian food in India, which was incredible.
How did you end up in Bali?
So I got back to Sydney. It was a bit of a loose end. What do I do next? And I was working with Nathan Sassy just to help him out. He was opening a Lira, the tapas bar in Piermont. And it's like 1 month sort of turned into, I think it was nearly a year we worked together, helping him out. And I just got a phone call from my best buddy who's already here in Bali, Ben Cross, and he was working at Coup d'etat. And basically they were looking, Philip Davenport, the executive chef, was moving away. Ben was taking that position, and then I stepped into Ben's position and moved after that, moved to Bali.
What was it like for you when you first got there?
I'd never really been to Bali before. Obviously, being in Australia, it was so close as a holiday destination. I'd never ventured to Bali. So, yeah, it was a completely different sort of culture from India as well. You know, I was sitting in the kitchen in India saying nothing will be as hard as this. But when I first got to Bali, I found it quite challenging because there was no real sort of hospitality environment. You know, it was more of a job for the guys in the kitchen or the service. So I had to really change my view on how I managed the kitchen and how you could work with the guys in a certain certain aspects. I found it quite difficult to start with. So, yeah, that was a good challenge.
You mentioned at the top of the show that just sort of at the tail end of the pandemic, you were out of work and you started doing private dinners. But what sort of impact did the pandemic have on you and your views on sort of what you want to get out of this industry?
It completely changed the whole landscape of Bali because 90% of it's tourism. You know, so everyone with businesses, everyone with restaurants, you know, regardless if it was hospitality or cuisine or anything, everyone really had to take note. And, you know, luckily people were still paying their staff. So, yeah, it was an extremely difficult time. But for me, I lost my job because of the pandemic. And what I have now is part of that because I found what I have now. Because of the pandemic, I had to hustle and start cooking private dinners, and the two guests that came to the dinner are now my business partners. So in some respects, I was very, very lucky compared to others, you know. It really did hit Bali hard. You know, you drive through Kuta, which was hustle and bustle for years and years, and it's completely desolate, nothing there, ghost town, which was pretty hard to see after such a vibrant holiday destination.
You've been living in Bali for quite a while now. Tell us a little bit about the local food. What do you love about it? Do you have any dishes or ingredients that you can share with us?
Yeah, my girlfriend's Indonesian, so I get to experience some great dishes. Soto ayam, the chicken soup, the beef rendang, you know, the usuals. There's some really amazing, you know, the babi guling. There's some incredible dishes. Yeah, I happened to do some private chefing on some yachts as well, and that was very interesting because I went out to, you know, Java and Raja Ampat, where there was really localized foods with the, you know, the soups, the hardcore, proper local food, which was very, very interesting.
You're now at Shelter, and you mentioned sort of briefly about the Middle Eastern cuisine that you're cooking there. Is there a dish or two that you can sort of tell us about that's on the menu that sort of exemplifies what you're doing?
Yeah, we have. We've just started doing this new one. At the guy I was cooking for, he loved this thing called lambajin, which is like a breakfast flatbread. We've started doing that with the spiced lamb flatbread, baked egg. We've started, you know, as the restaurants got busier and busier, we've managed to increase the size of the production area. We've started to do, we've built a bakery, so we're doing all our in-house sourdoughs. So started to make a coffee sourdough. So we used, that was inspired from Dan Puskas at Sixpenny. So he came to do an event when I was at Coup d'etat, and he was using the old coffee grounds. So I sort of took that on board and started using, there's a beer company here called Kura Kura, and they make this coffee stout. So I've been incorporating the coffee stout with that coffee sourdough, and it's been coming up really good. So really good.
Australia's renowned for some pretty incredible seafood, and you worked for some operators that really championed that while you were here in Australia. But there's some pretty incredible seafood around Bali as well. Tell us a little bit about some of the seafood you've got access to and what you've got on the menu.
Yeah, that's probably, like we were talking about product before, that's probably the most consistent thing here in Indonesia, in Bali. You know, we have incredible moon scallops, octopus, the prawns are incredible, obviously all the reef fish, the coral trout. It's like, even now, even the producers and the providors, they're getting sort of wind of how exciting the culinary scene is here. And, you know, days when I was in Australia, you get a phone call from your fish supplier. Now the Indonesian local suppliers are sending me messages every day, you know, beautiful red mullet, you know, incredible product, you know, just landed. And the next night, you know, the same night it's on the menu on the grill. So, yeah, the landscape has completely changed in regards to that product, but the seafood is probably the most consistent product here.
Well, you're really making a name for yourself at Shelter there in Bali. What do you love about what you do?
I just love mentoring, you know, the guys. Like I said before, hospitality, to them, it's more of a job. It's not a career. You know, I have a brigade of 30 guys, you know, and probably the service is around 40 guys. And it's just trying to instilling in them what I've learned, you know what I mean? Trying to be better every day. And the main thing is to be consistent. That's very difficult here when there's not so much of a culture of, you know, really good hospitality. You know, just teaching them hospitality, making the guests feel welcome, making them feel part of the environment, the restaurant. You know, that's the one thing I try and instill into the guys.
Well, Stephen, it's been many moons since I last saw you at the Bridge Room in Sydney, but it's an absolute honour to get you on Deep in the Weeds today and hear of the great things you're doing over there in Bali. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Definitely. Okay, thank you, mate. Cheers.
This is the Deep in the Weeds podcast. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we take a deep dive into the lives of the incredible people who ply their trade in the food and hospitality sector. Special thanks to executive producer Rob Locke for making this all happen. Follow us on Instagram at Deep in the Weeds Podcast or email us at podcast@deepintheweeds.com.au. Stay safe and be well.